Blessings, Rock and Metal Guardians. I hope you're doing well wherever you may find yourselves. I'm Dane, host of the channel, and welcome to part 3 of my little mini series called Isn't It the Music That Matters Most? I'm going to start today's episode with a quote from Stephen King in his hardback and paperback version of Different Seasons, which is a collection of 4 stories, one that symbolizes one of the seasons. You can find Apt Pupil in it, and of course the most famous, Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, which goes on to be a movie just called The Shawshank Redemption to shorten it up. But before you get to reading, Stephen King says, "It is the tale, not he who tells it," saying that the most important thing is the story itself, not the celebrity that goes with. Focus on the story itself. That's your priority, not me, the writer. And of course, translating that or applying that to music or art in general, in this case, of course, music, it's the art that matters, the music that matters, not the person or persons creating said music. So I'm going to show you a little visual that I give to my students at the beginning of every year. So what we have here is the 3-way relationship between art, the authors, or just one person, author, and the audience. So Stephen King is saying that the priority is art, okay, in this case, music. Now, some people have said, the postmodernists say that the author is dead. Well, I could not disagree more. Again, I'm going to go somewhere with this is another cerebral episode. So bear in mind, I'm going to make all the connections to my thesis, part 3. But the author does matter. A lot of people say you have to be careful with putting biography into a story. Well, it depends. If you're talking about the British Romanticists, they're an exception to the rule regarding when it comes, most of the time, when it comes to their poetry, more often than not, the narrator of said poem or speaker is the poet, him or herself. Not all the time, but a lot more than normal. You can't assume that, and I tell my students this all the time, you can't assume that the author or the speaker is one and the same. That's a fallacy. But with Romanticism, as I said, most of the time you can make that connection. Now, if we go back to my little communication device here, again, the postmodernists have said that the author is dead. Well, again, biography, have to be careful. Let's take the Keats poem, Hyperion, a fragment. If you know anything about Keats, you come to discover that that poem is very personal because it has to deal with him, that is the poet Keats, taking care of his little brother who's dying of tuberculosis, and he himself contracts the disease. And so I'm not going to go into the great details of that. You can look that up yourself or learn that in college. But it is very biographical. Doesn't always work, though. So you have to be careful with connecting biography to storytelling. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Now let's talk about Dune. So this since this is very popular with the movies coming out and everything, and I just recently watched those. One of the things I teach my students, and we learn in school, college, university, middle school, whatever, is that to misinterpret tone, the tone in which someone says something in a poem, a short story, a novel, etc., is to misinterpret meaning. Well, having said that, what sometimes we forget is to misinterpret author's purpose is to misinterpret meaning as well. So again, the author is not dead like the postmodernists would have you say. So for example, what I'm saying is that the author, his or her purpose in writing the book, if you miss out on that, you're missing the main agenda of said author or authors. So, for example, in an interview, Frank Hebert himself said that one of the main, if not the main purpose of the first Dune novel and the second Dune Messiah is to show you the dangers of what happens when you idolize someone. And he's talking, of course, about the protagonist, Paul Muad'Dib Atreides. And so, again, the connection to music is coming, I promise. So, if you look at that last name for a minute, Atreides, that is the plural form of the two brothers in Greek mythology, the sons of Atreus, Agamemnon, and Menelaus, whose family is cursed. So Paul is of that bloodline. And so it is his life story is in many ways a tragedy. You have to read the books to see that. But people who misread Dune see Paul Atreides as a hero. He's not a hero. He's an anti-hero. And in some ways, not as bad as the Harkonnens, but he has villainous characteristics. He's more of a good and bad. And you have the blind follower and Stilgar and the Fremen and that sort of thing. And so I don't want this video to be a big academic down the rabbit hole pursuit, but just to give you a taste of where I'm going in this video. Yes, it is the priority is the art itself, but the author does matter. Again, Frank Aber saying, or Herbert saying that Paul Muad'Dib's story is a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when we idolize figures and they get too big for their britches, that kind of thing. And of course, can't leave out the other A, audience. So having said that, the author is important, the story first and foremost, or in this case music as we're getting to, but what you bring to the table. So while the author's agenda may be the most important part. So if you're reading lyrics for a song that you like, the musicians who wrote the lyrics, they have an agenda. And if you misinterpret or misread what they're trying to get, you're missing out on what bit of wisdom they're trying to give to you. However, having said that, what you bring to the table is important. So if you find a theme in those lyrics, or that short story, or that poem, or whatever, or that movie that the author did not intend, it doesn't mean it's not valid. It could be, if it fits, if it makes logical sense, that kind of thing. So, let me get a book for a minute. So, I need this as a prop. Shakespeare, because I'm going to come to Shakespeare in a minute to make my case. Forgot to bring that when I rolled the camera, but that's okay. So, if we go back to Stephen King's quote for a minute, it is the tale, not he who tells it. In this case, it is the music that matters, not those who create it. So, now, that is not to say again that we, the audience, don't fit in or bring meaning to the table. We do, and that's very important. So again, all three of these are important. Otherwise, why have art if you don't have an audience? All right, so that's the three-way relationship between art, audience, and author. Now, here's where I'm going with the video. Can you separate the art from the artist? This gets tricky. And what I mean by that is, can you or should you still like someone's art, in this case music, if you don't like them as a person? This is a sticky wicket, as people say. My answer to that is, can you separate the art from the artist? Well, yes and no. So let's dive into that. I think 90+% of the time you can still like the art if you don't like the artist. Now, let me give you an example. I'm not the biggest Bruce Springsteen fan, but I do like some of his music. Not a lot of it, but some of it. I think he's a hypocrite because he champions himself and dresses himself as a musician for the working class man, and yet he charges $5,000 seats for his concerts. Here's a better example. Here's someone whose music I like much more than Bruce Springsteen, and that is John Lennon. More so with the Beatles than the solo, but I do like some of that solo work. And I remember watching, what made me think of this and write it down as an example is weeks ago I was watching another YouTuber that I'm very fond of, and he was talking about John Mellencamp going off at his audience and being ugly with them and that sort of thing. And, well, you can like his music but not like him because he was very caustic in this performance. He interrupted the fans and that kind of thing. But so in that video, the person, criticizing, rightfully so, John Mellencamp for his caustic attitude towards his fans while the concert is going on, mind you. And I posted, because the video maker or the content creator for this channel is a big John Lennon fan, as I am. He's more than I am. And I said, well, before you nominate John Lennon for sainthood, don't forget that he neglected and abused his eldest son, Julian. Mostly neglect. That's a form of abuse, though, right? So, he typed back, you're absolutely right, that kind of thing. And so I'm a big fan of John Lennon. I don't like him as a person, okay, because of the way he treated his son. But I do like some of his music, or much of his music. So that's much of what today's discussion is about. It's the music that matters, right? Now, there are some exceptions. And of course, it's up to you whether or not I'm not saying you must like or must dislike. That's not my agenda here. I'm simply saying, hey, these are some things to consider. So there are some exceptions where you cannot, I believe, again, just my opinion, you cannot separate the art from the artist. In this case, I'm talking about the German philosopher Heidegger. Let me explain. He was a Nazi sympathizer, if not a Nazi himself, and it's present in his philosophy and his philosophical works. And so when you first read Heidegger, you look at it and you go, this is some interesting stuff. Unfortunately, it turns out that much of what he wrote, his philosophical stance on the human condition, is what he uses to justify the Holocaust. And so when I read that, I was like, I'm out. I cannot read Heidegger anymore because he's applying his own philosophy to excuse or justify evil. So I threw all my Heidegger books out, and that was the end of that. So same thing when it comes to lyrics. If there's lyrics you don't like by an artist because you don't believe in their ideology or politics or their isms, well, you may not listen to them ever again, but it could be just one song, and you may not listen to that song anymore, that kind of thing. So it really depends. But with Heidegger, I really think, at least for me, I can't read him anymore, and I haven't in 20-something years when I discovered that. So again, it all depends on your own. So again, I'm not telling you how you should feel here, nor should anyone. We'll get to that's a form of fascism, right? So that's probably the most cerebral part of today's video. That is this notion of, can you separate the artist from the art? Now, the second part of this video is about celebrity worship. So let me open my Shakespeare book here for a minute, because this is very important. Sorry, folks. I'll turn to the table of contents will help. All right. Tragedy of Julius Caesar, page 1100. And I have them in yellow, highlighted. I do believe, yes. All right. Sorry about the delay, folks. So, hero worship is the second part of today's video. I'm a big believer in never putting anyone on a pedestal, whether you're talking about relationships, politics. The exception would be if you're a person of faith and you put God above that's totally different, right? I get that. So I'm not saying don't put God on a pedestal if you're a person of faith. I'm talking about humans. Okay, so whether we're talking about sports, politics, art, music, any type of art really, they're just like the rest of us. So let me go ahead and get the next cerebral, really cerebral part out of the way, but I have to read it because it's very important. So in Julius Caesar, Caesar himself has become a narcissist, or he's always been one. His ego is super huge, right? And the villain Cassius, who later on becomes much more of a likable person in Act 5, is speaking to Brutus, the real protagonist of the play, and he says that Caesar has grown like a colossus, gigantic, right? And this is referencing to one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Anyway, so he says to Brutus, "What should be in that quote-unquote Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is as fair a name. Sound them, it doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them, it is as heavy. Conjure with them. Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. Now in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat does this our Caesar feed, that he has grown so great?" And then, let's see, there's something else I do believe I wanted to read. Yes, he says, "I was born free as Caesar, so were you. We both have fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he, for once upon a..." Well, and he goes into his explanation. So, and then something, I think there's some, you may have heard, "Death is the great equalizer, prick me, do I not bleed like you," all these famous quotes, right, that people have said throughout the years, centuries, whatever, eons, this notion of think of the Breakfast Club, right, when they're sitting around at the end, really getting to know each other. And Molly Ringwald comes in because the geek is arguing with the metalhead. Okay, no one, she says, the princess says, no one is greater than anyone else, regardless of job, occupation. That's sort of a great theme from John Hughes in that movie, as is many of his films. So this notion of hero worship, right? It's the music that matters, not the character, is this part of the video. They're like the rest of us. They're human. So back in the day when I was a kid, I was a big Cincinnati Reds fan. So my dad got me this glove with all the names signed, but it was the stamped, it wasn't their actual, it was their actual signatures, but they were stamped into the leather somehow by some machine, right? And I loved the Big Red Machine as a kid, as I said, because you had 9 players, starters, who were all phenomenal baseball players. Rose, Canseco, Morgan, Bench, you name it, right? And back then, growing up as a young man in the 70s, a young boy in the 70s, I was born in 68, autographs were free. Now you go to Comic-Con or whatever, not always, but a lot of the time, autographs cost money. Oh, you want to take a picture with Doctor Who or the guy who plays Captain America in the Marvel movies? $400 or $200 or whatever it costs. This is the hero worship. I worship this person so much. I'm gonna pay money to take a photograph with them. That's kind of one of the concepts I'm dealing with here. So I'm not saying don't be a fan of the music and the talent, but when you worship someone, you put them on a pedestal, this is dangerous waters. Isn't it the music that's more important? Okay, so let's talk more about this. Back in the day when I was still a football fan, I remember why, and this is one of many reasons why I stopped watching football. I remember Chris Carter of the Minnesota Vikings on national TV, mind you, speaking to the rookies coming in for the new year. And one of them was Terry Bridgewater. They're in the studio, and Chris Berman or whoever, maybe whatever channel it was, they're there as well. And he's talking about when you go out at night to party with your fellow colleagues and friends, make sure you have a fall guy. You remember that? So he's telling these impressionable young men, these rookies about to start their first year in NFL, that if you're going to go out and party, and if you're going to have plans to commit some sort of criminal act, however small or big it is, make sure you have a scapegoat. And I remember telling a friend of mine how upset that I was made by that, and my friend goes, "Oh, I still like Chris Carter." How can you like someone after that? they're championing committing criminal acts. Not only that, but then so that they're not accountable that someone else who's innocent gets caught with the crime. That's just ridiculous. So same thing with Alvin Kamara. I remember when the news first broke, I was out with some friends for dinner. I saw my phone back when I would get notifications. I don't do that anymore. Don't even have the phone out at dinner anymore. But I get notifications that said, "Oh, Kamara almost killed someone within an inch of their life." And my different friend goes, "So how long Kamara's going to be out? Not, is that guy okay?" That kind of thing. So this hero worship gets in the way of the sport or the art or the music, that kind of thing. Vince Neil, right? I remember, the automobile accident with Razzle when I was in high school. I'm 16. I hear this. And I'm a big person of forgiveness. And that's between him and the man upstairs. But at the same time, again, I'm big on forgiveness, but I'm also big on accountability. I think a person needs to be held accountable and given the opportunity forgiveness. So a person commits a heinous crime or does something wrong, they need to serve the time, but also be given, they have to have both, right? Is what I'm saying. So I think a person should not get a free pass because they're famous. I think, yes, they have a right to be forgiven if they're truly sorry, but they also have to be held accountable and do the time. Anyway, so I remember I was on YouTube watching a video, something to do with Motley Crue, and a guy posted, how he's a big Vince Neil fan, how he met him, and boy, he was such a nice guy. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you spent 5 to 10 minutes with him, maybe an hour tops. That is still a small snapshot of this person. You're basing you're basing this person's character that in general, in overall terms, they're a nice person, a good person, out of anywhere between 10 minutes to an hour or two that you met. That is too small of a snapshot to judge a person's character. It's out of context. Of course they're going to be nice to you because it's a bad PR move if they're not nice to you. Right? And sometimes they're not nice to you because they're having a bad day or they're just ugly in general, right? That kind of thing. I get that. But again, that would be a bad PR move. From my personal experience, it takes about a year and a half to 2 years to get to know somebody if you spend 4 to 5 days a week with that person, like a colleague at work, that sort of thing. So again, too small of a context to make a judgment of a person's character. Okay? So again, just because someone's nice to you doesn't mean they're really a nice person. It's too small of a window to make that assessment. Similarly, think of Bill Cosby. When I was growing up as a boy, the Fat Albert Show, the Cosby Show as a teenager in high school, Bill Cosby seemed to be a person who really cared about, especially youth, specifically young men and being good people and that sort of thing, right? But who knew the dark person that was really inside? So again, this concept of never meet your heroes. And yet people are still going to defend those because they're blind or blinded by that celebrity status, that shiny object, right? The Kardashians come to mind. That's sort of never understood that kind of thing. Treating celebrities as special, like some sort of deity or god or goddess, right? Just, I don't get it. So here are some examples. If we go back in time, Shelley the poet. Shelley's my favorite poet of all time, but he was a horrible person. If you do the research, how he treated Harriet Westbrook so that he could be with Mary, who became his wife later, and the tragedy that ensued by him dumping Harriet Westbrook. Think of Michael Jordan. I read his biography many years ago. I'm sorry, I'm shaking the camera with my hands on the desk. After reading that biography, all it did was reaffirm what I knew regarding Jordan as a basketball player. Perhaps the greatest basketball player of all time, and yet a horrible person. I'm not judging anyone here. Let's get that straight. I'm just pointing out this is not someone I would like. Okay? That's not the same thing. So, example, how he could dish things out to people and mock and tease and make fun of them, but he couldn't handle it when it was done to him. So that makes him a hypocrite, of course. Other things as well. Here's an example of his some bad behavior. In this case, on the court, Muggsy Bogues. I can't remember his name exactly. a very short basketball player, considering how tall you need to be, or most people are in basketball, and Muggsy's coming at him, and Jordan says, "What you gonna do, midget?" That kind of horrible attitude. Again, great ball player, not a person I like personally. James Hetfield comes to mind. I remember reading in an article years and years ago when I was in high school about how James Hetfield talking about after the gigs, the meet and greets, and how he never wanted to be the person. He didn't specify what band, but how when he was a teenager growing up, he would go and try to meet with the band and they would blow him off and walk off, and he didn't want to be that way. Great. And then years later, there he is reading in articles, him doing that himself. I don't have time for you. Okay. But in an ugly manner, that kind of thing. And then making fun of both Lane Staley of Alice in Chains and Kurt Cobain because of their addictions and their deaths. And doing it live in concert. So I don't like James Hetfield as a person, but I do like the first 5 albums of Metallica. So again, separating the art from the artist kind of thing. Yeah, all these schisms in these bands. Dennis DeYoung wanted to take a break from Styx because he was ill. Nope. Gee, what a great bunch of guys you guys are in the band, right? Think about Mike Portnoy of Dream Theater. Not a big Dream Theater fan, but way back when, guys, I need to take a break. I'm exhausted. Nope, we're going to continue out without you. Well, he's back in the band now, which is great for the band because most people like Portnoy more than Mangini. There are exceptions, but this is the kind of the schisms that go on that show you that maybe this isn't someone you should be hero worshiping, right? Now, I'm an optimist. Let me say that. Again, no judgment here. Just, you cannot like, in other words, just because you don't like someone doesn't mean you're not judging them. So I don't like Michael Jordan, but I don't judge him. That's not the same thing. I'm just pointing out, hey, I don't like this person. Okay? I like their talent, or I did like their talent, they're retired. But just because a lot of people equate with, oh, you don't like someone, you're judging them. I'm not judging them. I just don't like them. Big difference. Okay, now, as I said, I'm an optimist most of the time, so I give people the benefit of the doubt. However, if you've proved yourself to be a persona non grata, think R. Kelly. I'm not judging, as I said, but I don't have to like that person. All right, so I've kind of beaten that thing in the ground a bit, right? I'm certainly not going to idolize someone in any way whatsoever, regardless of if they're a good person or someone I don't like. I just think that is not the reason you listen to music, okay? Same thing with actors and other types of celebrities, right? So some people, or too many people, get caught up in the character when it's supposed to be about the music. Now, would I like to meet some of my favorite musicians? Absolutely. So you know the old question, right? Looking on my cat, he's okay. Who would you like to have a beer with if you could? Well, this is not a musician, but he's an actor who I just love. Samuel L. Jackson would be someone I'd like to have a beer with. Well, I'd have a mocktail since I don't drink anymore. However, if the opportunity came, would I actually go up to Samuel L. Jackson and talk to him? I probably wouldn't, not out of shyness or being timid, just want to give the person their space, right? Because let's face it, these people, these celebrities, they have their own family, friends, social circle, etc. And most celebs don't want to be bothered by, someone crushing over them, that kind of thing, right? Or bromancing them, that kind of thing. Instead, I'd rather wish them the best from afar, not worship, but wish them the best from afar, pray for them, and hope that they're happy. Now think of Neil Peart's quote from the song Limelight, "I can't pretend a stranger is a long-awaited friend." This works both ways. So the musician, the artist, can't pretend, in this case, Neil, that his fans are his friends. 99.9% of them, they're not. We get that. That makes sense. Having said that, we, as fans, should also see the concept as well that, hey, they're not our friends either. Now, there are some exceptions. Some critics, some writers, authors of music, magazine writers, they sometimes become friends with the people they're interviewing, that kind of thing. That's going to happen, but that's not very often. That's rare. So the notion of hero worship can get in the way of the enjoyment of music. Now, there are some critics, etc., who will go out of their way to remind you. YouTubers, people who used to have TV shows, hint, hint. They will go, I'm thinking of one person intentionally, some people will go out of their way to remind you, oh, these are such great guys. I'm friends with them all. You know who I'm talking about. I steer clear from that kind of talk, because when you do that, in this case, this person, you're not focusing on the music, right? You're focusing on your friendship with them. That's not what it should be about. So anyway, I hope you have a great day. Take care now. Blessings to all.